is The New Rise of Revolution in Latin America. And our speakers, and they will be in this order. Juan Cruz, Ferre, Left Voice and Socialist Workers' Party, PDS, Argentina. Our second speaker will be Comrade Bob Lyons, Socialist Action, LAS, based in Costa Rica. Our third speaker will be Nety Maroquin, Socialist Action, active in Toronto and Guatemala. And our last but not least speaker is Comrade Jaime Gonzalez, Social Unity League, LUS, Mexico. So without further ado, I do believe they have 15 minutes each. We'll start with Comrade Juan.
Hello? Is it working?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So I'll try to keep it in 15 minutes. I have some notes. Sorry, I can't read speeches. It's probably part that it's English, and I cannot read like that fast, and it's part that I'm from Argentina and I just need to improvise a little bit. It never comes out well, so I'm gonna just try to.
That's as loud as it goes.
It's kind of a big topic for me at least, and I'll try to summarize, and then we can delve into more of specifics in the Q&A afterwards. So I'm going to talk basically about the left in Argentina, and particularly about the left front. But first, I need to kind of give a brief overview of the political situation in Argentina. So as you know, in most countries, in several countries in Latin America, there's been this pink tide wave of center-left governments that took office around 2000 and after 2000. The Kirchner in Argentina, Lula in Brazil, Chavez in Venezuela, etc., etc. So those center-left governments, just 2-3 years ago, depending on the country, started to come to an end, and it was partly because of the political situation, partly because of the economics, but very, very interestingly, when in some countries they were easily taken away and shifted, switched by right-wing government, as it was in Argentina. Maybe Argentina was the harbinger of the right turn in South America. And also in Brazil, Dilma Rousseff was, through the impeachment process, was taken off. Is it right? Yeah, can you hear me? So in the right turn took different shapes and different forms depending on the country. For example, in Venezuela, we see that it's the continuation of Chavismo, who is applying the austerity policies and who has actually very strongly moved to the right. But if we take a look closely, and particularly in Argentina, we see that the second term of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, which is Néstor Kirchner's wife, widow, who took office after him, she was already applying austerity policies and attacking workers even before leaving office. And that was, I think, it's a key aspect to understand why she lost then in elections against Macri, who no one thought was going to win, actually, not even our comrades in Argentina. It was a surprise for everyone. But in 2015, he took office and defeated what was going to be the continuation of Cristina Kirchner, who was Daniel Scioli, and who had already committed with businessmen, with the Chamber of Commerce and with different organizations about a right-wing program. So the direction was already set even before Macri took office. This has a lot to do with the deceleration of the economy. The financial crash of 2008 didn't have an impact immediately in Argentina. In Latin America, there was still some lifeline provided by China and by the Chinese demand of raw materials in whole Latin America. But around 2011, 2012, this started to wane, and it became a real crisis and deceleration. In some countries worse than in others. Venezuela is, of course, the worst case, but also Brazil is already in a depression, and it's very much related to the plummeting in the global prices of raw commodities such as soybeans, copper, oil, etc. So, it shows in a very strong way how those countries failed to develop, and today are still very, very dependent on selling raw materials and selling basic commodities in the global market. So this economic crisis in Latin America gives, we understand it as, in some countries deeper than in others, as with a concept by Gramsci that is organic crisis, which is a crisis that goes beyond a day-to-day crisis of a government or specific personnel of a government or something. A crisis that is a crisis of the whole regime, and that encourages the people, the working class, etc., to start thinking about other ideas, and and we don't not only see that in Latin America, but we see this in also countries in Europe. We see this in the United States to some extent. So we're not, for example, in Venezuela, we see that there is a full-blown organic crisis. In Argentina, maybe not so much, but in all these countries that I have mentioned, there are elements of deep questioning of the capitalist system, and we can see expressions of that in the election of Donald Trump, in the campaign of Bernie Sanders, or the rebirth of the word socialism in the US. We can see that in the crisis of almost all social democratic parties in Europe, and we can see that in the very nasty impeachment and arrest of Lula, how the right is very emboldened and is applying attacks, austerity measures. And there's a very deep questioning of the regime. So in some countries in Europe, we've seen the emergence of new organizations on the center-left, we say, the neo-reformism, like Syriza, like Podemos, and in a way, they have, there was a lot of hope in those organizations. There is still among some people, but I think we could all agree here that, for example, the victory of Syriza, and after they took off it was really a very strong disappointment for everyone, and how they failed to advance the demands of the people, and how they totally capitulated to the Troika. So the same way we see these neo-reformist organizations in Europe, for example, in the US, we see the growth of the DSA. In Argentina, what has really grown in the past 10, 15 years is the revolutionary left. And now I'm gonna go straight to the what do you say? The nucleus of my talk. The heart, yeah, thanks.
The corazón.
So, let me see. Do we have, okay, yeah, that's a picture. We on the left are kind of used, it's a bit sad, but we gotten used to be, in a way, in the margins. And when I started doing political work, I was a member of the PTS of this party in Argentina for 8 years before I moved to the US, which was in 2014. And you know, when I talked to people I used to work in a hospital. my coworkers, yeah, I'm a member of the PTS, blah, blah. No one knew, no one had any idea of what it was. Well, that changed dramatically around 2011. So there was this really surprising emergence of the left in the polls, in the elections, and in events in class struggle that took center stage in national broadcasts and TV, etc. So maybe we can go to the next one. So at some point I saw my comrade Nicolás del Caño in this that is it's a presidential debate, and it was broadcasted live on all TV channels, and there was like the four main candidates, bourgeois candidates, and it was the guy that I knew, that I hugged, that Nicolás del Caño speaking on TV to everyone, and it was the whole country watching. It was like having a debate with Trump and Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, for example. So maybe you can pass the next one. So this was this is the result of the elections in 2017, the last one. Don't pay exactly attention to everything. It's not the point is to show how it is a national phenomenon. It's not only reduced to one specific niche or redoubt of or stronghold of the left. In the last elections, we won 3 seats in National Congress, and this has been, I think it's been 3 elections that we got over 1 million votes, and 3 seats in National Congress and over 40 seats nationally in legislatures, state or province legislatures, and plus those national. And this amounts more or less to just over a bit over 3% of the vote. I don't know how are the elections here, but at least it's very different from the U.S. There's no single member districts or first past the poll. There's proportional representation in the provinces, so it's in a way it's easier to get in national. You don't have to have over 50% in a district. But what I think the main maybe the main point that I would like to make is that the example of the left front shows that there is no need to water down your program. There is no need to say you are fighting against austerity. You are an anti-austerity party, or make a call to the people instead of the working class, or say you're fighting for democracy and hide that you are actually fighting for socialism. So I think we can go to the next one. Sure. Oh yeah, maybe these 2 slides is only to show how not only this first presidential candidate is a national figure, but also we have many other national leaders who are invited to shows to debate against members of parliament of the official Cambiemos. You can go the next 2. Okay. We can wait there a bit. So I want to refer a little bit to what's the history of. It's not a long history, very short, but of the left front. The left front is a coalition of 3 main parties. 2 of them are actually the more or less the bigger partners. One quite smaller, and there's very small organizations that also support the left front. The party I was member of is PTS, Partido de Trabajadores Socialistas, and there's
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Oh. Okay. And then there's Partido Obrero and Izquierda Socialista. Almost as an accident, the 3 parties are Trotskyist parties. Of course, it's not an accident, but the point I want to make is that it's not necessarily a Trotskyist front. It's a front that is socialist, that advances, that has a platform that says explicitly that we will need a social revolution, that we will use the seats in Congress to advance the struggles, etc., etc. But it's not necessarily Trotskyists. We welcome all other organizations as long as they agree with the program. And we have had some rejections, or we have rejected some parties or organizations that wanted to join, but we didn't agree, for example, in our characterization of think tank governments outside Argentina. And they probably supported Evo Morales or Chavez. And for us, that was a deal breaker, because we don't think as socialists you can manage the capitalist state. It's a contradiction in itself. So we take, since I have very short time, I want to make a few points. We take elections seriously, and we think the time when elections take place is when everyone's talking about politics, and it's the best time to talk to our coworkers, to our members of unions about a socialist candidate, etc., etc. But that's still a tactic, and that is still the seats we get in Congress are always to support the struggles. And how does that happen? Well, the members of parliament, our congressmen, they all make a teacher's salary, and they donate everything else to different struggles, different worker struggles. And a teacher's salary in Argentina is pretty small, I can assure you. But also that not just donating, but also putting their own body. And we can later see this video, but you can
Go next.
Go next. Yeah. So these are some of the, and you can pass
Okay.
every slide. These are all, you're gonna see the people that are in there. They are members of Congress that are in those fights, supporting those workers who are either laid off or are fighting for the expropriation of a factory, or are being repressed by the police. So we take very seriously the question of being in the front lines and of showing with our own representatives what it means to be a party of combat, a party of class struggle, and a party rooted in the working class that advances revolutionary politics. 1 minute. Oh, great. I have still 1 minute. So I'm going to wrap up then. We have still many differences with our partners in this coalition, and we here and there we fight, and we fight very heated. We have heated debates, and they are all public, and we think that's the way we want to have them. As an organization, the PTS, we take very seriously being rooted in the working class and do political work among workers. We have political work in 60 different unions and strong presence in 20 unions, mostly teachers, metal workers, printing, oil, transportation, food industry. And just to wrap up, there's no shortcuts to build such an organization. It's not an exception. If in the US people say, oh, but in Argentina things are more tough and so on. In Argentina we have public healthcare, we have public education.
Okay.
The unionization rate is over 30%. So we're much better off in many ways than in the US. So don't come and tell me, oh, in Argentina it's not an exception. But it requires patient organizing in constant political battle with reformism and with left-wing populism, with communist propaganda, working class independence as a principle, and ruthless fight against the union bureaucracy. That's a key aspect of our program, and be always on the front lines of class struggle.
Okay, I gotta stand. I can't sit and talk. No, that's okay. Yeah, maybe I'll go over here. My arms will flail around. I don't want to hit anybody. Good evening, comrades and friends. really nice to see such a good turnout here tonight. Juan talked about the parts of the rise of the class struggle in the southern cone of Latin America, particularly in Argentina. I'm going to talk about the rise of the class struggle in and the revolutionary movements in Central America. First of all, let me clarify what I mean by Central America. Central America includes the 5 original countries: Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Costa Rica. Those 5 original countries are called Central America because they were provinces of the captaincy of Guatemala, which was the Spanish name for the colony that Spain ran. It was a sub administrative district. The original administrative district was actually in Mexico, and it was transmitted down through Guatemala. So that's the area I want to talk about. I know I'm not going to speak about Panama because Panama has a history that's somewhat different than the rest of the countries of Central America. And I'm not going to talk about Belize because Belize is unique. It was an English settlement, and it was never a province, and it was never a colony. And it has a different relationship to the points I want to make. And the points I want to make, as Tommy Douglas said, say what you're going to say, tell people what you're going to say, and say it. Okay, there are 3 points I want to make. The first is that there is a regional and not a national aspect to the revolutionary struggles of the people of Central America. And that's the overriding thing to understand, is that it is not a national, simply a national struggle, that is regional in scope. The reason for it is the history of Central America. Now, it's going to take 2 or 3 minutes to go through the brief history. 1821 is the date, which is the important date in terms of the independence of all the countries of Central America. There was in September 15th that the Proclamation of Independence in Guatemala City allowed and brought forth the notion of independence for the provinces. At that time, there was a Congress taking place of the Criollo bourgeoisie, which is the settlers who saw themselves having Spanish ties in Guatemala City. Of course, workers didn't vote, indigenous peoples didn't vote, women didn't vote at any of these gatherings. There was only a select group of landowners. But this select group of landowners and mercantilists, capitalists in the region, voted to declare independence. That independence actually didn't take place until 1823. After the original declaration in 1821, the Mexican dictator Uribe invaded Guatemala City, put to flight to the Congress which had declared independence, and it was only after his overthrow in 1823 that the Federated Republic of Central America, it was originally called the United Provinces of Central America, but because people saw themselves as a republic and wanted to have a democratic republic modeled somewhat on the United States of America, that they declared the Federal Republic of America. That demand and vision of integration of those 5 provinces was one of the central political points programmatic points of the capitalist bourgeoisie. Most of them were mercantilists. The bourgeoisie, which was distributing goods that they imported from Europe or from North America, as well as the shopkeepers and the distributors, and a section of the small proprietors, of landholders, formed what became known as the liberal faction. And that liberal faction was a regional faction. The central hero, if you like, the central symbol of that regional bourgeoisie, liberal bourgeoisie, was Francisco Morazán de Quesada. who is, my kids in Costa Rica go to the Escuela Francisco Morazan Casera because he represented a number of things. First of all, he represented Central America as a central nation. That is, a people with a common culture, a common language, and a common history. And that common culture and history was common. It was Francisco Morazan was a hero not only in Costa Rica, he's a hero throughout Central America. Because his fight was for an integrated federal republic that had the liberal notions of democracy and had the liberal notions of mass participation insofar as they extended that mass participation to the petty bourgeois and bourgeois elements, not including women or indigenous people or the black populations on the Caribbean coast. But they represented the liberals. On the other hand, and this is part of, I want to put this in a historical context. If you think about the revolutions of 1848 in Europe, for example, these kind of revolutionary movements and revolutionary wars in Central America took place all basically at the same time. The notions of liberty, fraternity, and equality were part of the common coin of the politics of the liberal bourgeoisie who struggled against their enemies. And the enemy was the conservatives. If you read the historical textbooks, you have the conservatives. The conservatives represented monarchists, big landowners. Well, I should put the big landowners, who wanted to maintain feudal agricultural relations on the big land holdings throughout Central America. And the conservatives were a regional force as well. And the history of Central America in the 1800s was basically a history of the struggle between, on the one hand, the liberal bourgeoisie to establish a regional country. They were defeated, despite the fact that there was 4 different attempts. That aim of the liberal bourgeoisie in Central America was defeated. The last attempt was in 1922 through the Pact of San Jose, when the 5 central countries signed an agreement but fell apart about 2 years later, and that was the last real attempt of the regional to integrate. And that's important to understand because there are remnants of that. For example, there's a Central American Parliament that is an advisory body, but it's designed to work out differences between the nations of Central America. There is the immigration system, the migration, is an integrated system where people can travel much more freely in Central America between the countries without requiring visas and the other rigmarole that closed borders impose on people. So that aim for regional integration is still there and is still a part of it. Now, that's a kind of the political historical context. The second point I want to talk about is Central America. They have the way of looking at Central America as the weakest link in the chain of imperialist relationships in the Americas. And I want to talk about a few reasons why that is so. What do I mean by the weakest link? Well, it has a number of aspects. The first is that the bourgeoisie, the ruling classes of Central America, are totally integrated into imperialism, into the mechanisms of imperialism, and are supported by and propped up by imperialism. The strength of the individual ruling classes on a national level differs one to another. For example, Guatemala, and I know Nety's going to talk about Guatemala, the oligarchy in Guatemala is the strongest in Central America.
Latin America.
But at least in Central America, okay? Whereas in Honduras, which was a country dominated, totally dominated by Nety Fruit Company and other American imperialist interests, the ruling class of that country is very, very weak. It is only propped up, it is propped up by American direct intervention in terms of military intervention in Honduras, a military base. It's this, in fact, the Americans have it as the central counter-revolutionary base in Central America is located in Honduras, as well as the kind of investments that go into Honduras and the relationship between that investment and what's happening in the structure of the country itself. For example, lots of small proprietor landholders in the Aguan Valley are being swept off their land literally by the army and by armed fascist thugs linked to investors who are trying to take that land away and to plant it with oil palms, African oil palms, because African oil palm is the production is increasing all through Central and South America, and in fact it's involved in deforestation and devastation throughout the world, throughout the tropical belt of the world. So we have a difference in the relatively strength of the ruling classes in Central America, but they are all weak relative to certain other bourgeoisies in Latin America. I think, for example, the Brazilian bourgeoisie or the Argentinian bourgeoisie. The relative strength is much stronger in the larger area. Part of it is because the failure of the bourgeois revolution in Central America to produce a regional ruling class which can draw on the resources of the region as a whole, and that's one of the primary reasons why I say it is that region is the weakest link. Secondly, is the economic situation of the masses in Central America.
3 minutes.
Okay, the poverty and the structure of the economies in Central America leads to explosive political responses to attacks on their very meager standards of living. And I mean meager standards of living. For example, in Nicaragua, the per capita GDP, that is as a measurement, is $2,000 a year. A little over $2,700 a year. The average, the minimum wage in Nicaragua is $141 a month. In Honduras, it's a little over $200 a month. In El Salvador, it's about the same. So you have people living with an income which doesn't, in some cases, meet even the basic food basket, the canasta básica of the countries. Which that's the second reason. The third reason is the structure of the working class in Central America. For example, in Nicaragua, again, 70% of the working class works in the informal sector. That means they don't have a regular job. They're day laborers on the farms, they're day laborers in the city, they're vendedores, they sell things on the street, they drive motorbikes to do express delivery, all kinds of informal jobs. They don't have a formal employer, only 30%. In Honduras, it's a little less, about 55% of the population is engaged in the informal economy. El Salvador's is around 50%, and Guatemala I'm not going to talk about because Nety's going to talk about it. What? It's very similar, right? The per capita GDP, the structure of the economy, all leads to a situation which, over the last several years, I would argue, is developed into a pre-revolutionary situation in Central America. We've seen it, and we've seen how explosive it is in Guatemala, the movement to sweep away the government, the response, the semi-insurrectional response in the barrios in December of 2017 throughout Honduras. We saw it 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago in downtown Nicaragua, but not only downtown Managua, all throughout the country of Nicaragua, where there was an uprising against what was a relatively mild attack on the working standards, the living standards of the workers, but the workers, because of their situation, their precarious situation, it was an attack, and they responded that way. The pensioners responded, and the students responded. Now, the students are not just students in Central America. Most students work. They work to provide part-time jobs in the formal economy to help their families, and which gives the student movement itself an extra character, an extra political character. And Elizabeth is telling me that it's time to wrap up. I just want to wrap up with this. In 1857, a band of mercenaries led by a guy called William Walker made the first major imperialist intervention into Central America in terms of an armed intervention, and tried to conquer Central America on behalf of the Americans. They reached Costa Rica, and at the Battle of Santa Rosa, a united revolutionary army made up of workers and peasants throughout Central America defeated that attempt of imperialism. That's what it's going to take to defeat imperialism in Central America in the very near future. So, wrap that up.
Thank you.
Good evening. I do have to read, sorry, because my English is not good. Good night. Unfortunately, my introduction about Guatemala is very embarrassing. Guatemala is the poorest country in America, and is the country with the lowest literature rates.
It's on.
Guatemala's president is the highest paid president in the whole Latin America, and on top of his salary, we have to pay him about $4,000 daily for his food and for his things. When we know that we have almost 5 million people dying of hunger. In the last 24 hours, just in the last 24 hours, 2 indigenous leaders have been murdered. Luis Maroquin from Codeca and Jose Canchoc from CDA. They are indigenous leaders, as I told you. And the president, in the last 24 hours, has been requested that 2 ambassadors, Venezuela and Sweden, be removed, because those ambassadors were always committed to fight against the corruption. So in this opportunity, I am gonna talk about you. I am just gonna show the titles, and after you can see the conditions of the working class and the indigenous people in Guatemala. This is the, yeah, maybe just like that. No, because you are not gonna be, no, thank you, I think it,
Okay.
yeah. So, the condition of the working class and the indigenous people in Guatemala. The socio-economic and political condition of the working class in Guatemala, or the indigenous people, can be resumed in the following aspect. Both working class and indigenous people live in conditions completely in the high exploitation and social, economic, political, and cultural exclusion by the business sector, the industry, the commerce, financial service, etc., and by the landowners by the Lyons. So they are excluded from the economy by this alliance made by the business industry and the agro-industrial oligarchy. By oligarchy, I mean the business landowners who have held the political power with huge financial control since the independence from Spain in 1821. As a result of this exclusion, the working class and the indigenous people live in poverty, extreme poverty, high levels of analphabetism, and extremely low levels of education, high level of malnutrition, and practically not existent health service. On top of that, they have lost their cultural values as a product of the cultural distortion promoted by the media through consumerist propaganda. Being indigenous is completely aggravated in Guatemala by suffering not only exclusion and exploitation, but also deeply rooted racism that infect all areas of the society. As a result of this, indigenous people in Guatemala have no participation in any area, institution, or decision making. The dominating right wing have been successful in breaking any theoretical conceptualization that would allow the working class and the indigenous people any political ideologic structure that would allow them to understand, accept, and assume political values in their struggle. Their fights are therefore minimizing. Their fights are therefore to merely economic fights, and that would appear to some culturalistic fights. The second subject I am gonna talk is, is about the nominating political parties in Guatemala. The nominating political class and dominating parties in Guatemala since the famous signing of the peace that was in December 29, 1996, during Alvaro Arzu government, that is the worst and thief and very thief government in Guatemala. The nominating class has developed through their political parties the honing and implementation of neoliberal public policies to dismantle all public institutions and negate to the state any kind of economy and producing capacity. They have done this through the privatization, which is still highly pushed for the government today. Of course, the contract and sales go directly to the members of the oligarchy. It's important to understand that because the signing of the peace was falsity. Was fake, accepted by the economy elite members who had already resolved not to implement the substantive terms contained and instead create ghost company to take advantage of any resources the state had to offer. In Guatemala, there are no dominating political parties. What has been implemented is an artificial creation or mercantile organization disguised as a political parties. 4 to 8 years later, they disappear to give away for the next political parties to take place with a new name and new leaders, but truly run by the same people. They strengthen their color, they have implemented a strategy of extreme discreditation of the role of politics in social movements, and they attack any leadership to appear to conduct themselves in an honest manner. This is how they have convinced the population that they are dislike politics and don't care about taking part in politics through these they have been able to take control of all branches of government. My last subject to talk tonight, or to read tonight, is about the imperialism of Canadians mining company in Guatemala. Canadians mining companies have been draining Guatemala's natural resources while leaving environment chaos in the indigenous community, who has not consent to their presence to begin with. To help the mining's interest, the Canadian authorities support the penal persecution of community leaders who fight against the invasion of the miners' company, against of the depletion of water and deforestation. The miners' company cannot even be considered investors in Guatemala because their mining activities are sweep shop, so as to avoid paying taxes. They treat only the 1% that they pay the Guatemalan government as a gift to our countries. There is no accountable way to track how much material they are actually mining, since there is no protocol established by the Guatemalan government. Not only are the mining companies using Guatemala without paying taxes, but they are also failing to do what an investment is meant to. They are not leaving behind a business structure that allows for continuing earning to the state and therefore generating jobs. On the contrary, mining has just left deforestation, contamination, destruction of the environment with huge social ruptures, plus many indigenous leaders in Guatemala has been putting in the jail and they have been killed, and really the indigenous about the miners, not only Canadian, because there is from another countries also, but Canadian has more or less like 75% of the business. Really, the poor people in Guatemala, they are devastated about this kind of business from Canada, because as I told you, to Guatemala, to the government, they just leave the 1% of what they get. So our rivers are just completely destroyed. Believe me, many kids around this area has a lot of in the skin, very bad sickness, coughing. Many women that get pregnant, they have abortion because they are very weak, the environment, everything. So for me to talk about Canada is like a bad feeling, because really is a lovely country which we have to appreciate all the migrants that come here, because we have a very lovely society, but we have to tell what is happening in other countries that Canada is making exploitation. I really appreciate, and I'm sorry about my English. I really... She doesn't even have to tell me stop, because...
No, you're right on time. Excellent. Okay, now we're ready for Jaime Gonzalez from Mexico.
Go ahead, Jaime. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You're on. Can you hear me?
Vamos, Jaime.
Go ahead, Jaime. Go ahead.
Can you hear us?
Let me try call him and. Okay. Hold on a sec. Hello? Do you have video or no? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I had turned it off to see if we could get a better signal.
Okay.
So, yeah, I can hear you. So everything is okay, except that I might turn off the video in order to have a better signal. So,
Okay,
Yeah, so,
okay, great. Go ahead, we're ready for you.
Okay, go ahead, Jaime, we're ready for
okay.
you.
Yeah.
Turn on the video. Turn on.
Okay, I'll turn off the video because the signal right now is in yellow, so I want it to be more intense and wide. So I'll begin my talk. First of all, some words about the caravan that had worried Mr. Trump so much, called the caravan, the Via Crucis of the migrants. Contrary to what the U.S. President said, the caravan did reach Tijuana. You can look it up. I'm seeing here. I don't want to project my desktop because it might upset the signal. But I'm seeing here some footage by CNN on the caravan arriving in Tijuana some days ago, and contrary to what the president of the U.S. said, the caravan did reach Tijuana. Although, of course, there were all sorts of incidents on the way. The Mexican government played a very dual role because on the one side, they did give permits to a good part of the caravan, either for 20 days to reach the U.S. border, or longer if they wanted to regularize their situation in Mexico. On the other side, a small part of the caravan that broke off from the caravan, or that separated from the caravan, was caught by what we call the La Migra Azteca, the Aztec Migra, one of our national shames, the migration department from the Interior Ministry, and they were returned to their countries. So, but anyway, the idea is that they are putting pressure to the U.S. government. Some have already passed into the United States and are being evaluated. But of course, you know the conditions in the U.S. border. So hopefully, this pressure put by the caravan and by the world media and world public opinion will help these migrants. I just wanted to clarify the fact that, contrary to what has been repeatedly said, that the caravan was stopped. This is not true. It was only a part of it that had broken up. I don't know the particulars. I'm going to talk first of all on the role of class collaboration, or class interest subordination, as a key to understanding the left nationalist governments in Latin America. The 2001 inauguration of Hugo Chavez for a second term as president of Venezuela started the wave of electoral successes of left nationalist governments in Latin America. This wave was spectacularly reinforced with the 2002 electoral triumph of Luis Ignacio Lula in Brazil and the 2006 victory by Evo Morales in Bolivia. Among other left nationalist governments, Rafael Correa ascended to the presidency of Ecuador in 2007 and Ollanta Humala in Peru in 2011. And of course, I'm sure most of you have heard about the recent developments in Nicaragua, in which the Sandinista government made a bloody repression against the population that was protesting. I will not deal on Nicaragua because I think that because my talk is going to focus on some other points, which I think I hope you find of interest. The importance of these governments impose on us the need to make at least a general assessment of both their successes and shortcomings and the defeats lived by these left nationalist governments because of their worldwide repercussions and the implications for revolutionary socialists. Nationalism has been an obvious and very visible political feature of these governments since their platforms and general discourse have tried to reach out to the widespread resentment in Latin America against the political submission, oppression, and economic exploitation by imperialist countries, especially the United States. But even the left nationalist label is a convenient form of designating, even if the nationalist label is a convenient form of designating these types of governments, it fails to capture their essential characteristic, which is the key to understanding both their temporal successes and ultimate failures, and that is their wide class collaboration schemes. Under this kind of politics, important concessions are made to workers as well as wide sectors of the impoverished population, especially under favorable economic conditions, but under the implicit or explicit understanding that plebeian movements, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and organizations will not attempt against private property of the means of production. And this has been the decisive difference between the processes followed by left nationalist regimes and the consolidation of a workers' and peasant government during the Cuban Revolution. In Cuba, from 1959 to well into the 1960s, the initiative of powerful workers, peasants, and popular movements were not only encouraged, but consistently led by the 26th of July movement and resulted in a fundamental change in property relations. The most prominent example was the takeover of the sugarcane industry, not by obscure government forces, as the US government and reactionary leaders of the Cuban exile would like you to believe, but by general mobilizations of workers and their allies in the sugar mills and plantations. By the way, for those of you who are interested in the history of the Latin American labor movement, and especially in the Cuban Revolution, there is a very important antecedent to the militancy and consistency of the sugar mill workers in 1960 and 1961. You can read about it in a remarkable piece by Michael Maroquin, which is titled Sugar Mill Workers and the 1933 Cuban Revolution, part of a book titled Workers' Control in Latin America 1930 to 1979, edited by Jonathan C. Brown and published by the University of North Carolina in 1997. This narrates the movement, this article narrates the movement headed by strike committees in 1933 that took the task of running the plantations. They issued orders, delegated responsibilities subject to a vote. They disarmed the mills guards, who generally did not attempt to obstruct workers' activities, and even sold part of the product of the mills in order to keep their movement going. It would be fascinating to go into this movement in detail, but I would leave it for those of you who would like to read the book. You can Google it. It's Workers' Control in Latin America. And I have seen that a complete version of the book is publicly and freely available. Of course, I mean, there's for many people, there's nothing like reading the hard copy, which of course is a wonderful experience. So this gives us some insight on the depth and experience the mass movement have already gone through in Cuba, and into why the Cuban revolutionary government was able to survive and even achieve successes in social well-being that no other Latin American country has reached, even during the bleakest years of American government efforts to isolate it and crush it. It was popular participation and support which played the key social role in critical movements like the failed 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion and that discouraged further American military ventures to overthrow the Cuban government. In the context of the present talk, class collaboration, which we might more properly call workers and their allies' interest subordination, refers to the process where governments and political forces are willing to make concessions to diverse workers and plebeian demands as long as the social forces behind these demands are willing to contain their expectations when the government asks them to, and most importantly, to avoid advancing beyond the limits imposed by the indispensable need of capitalism to maintain a system based on private property. Any seasoned leader, of course, of the social movement knows that there's always some give and take in a movement. I'm not referring to class collaboration as this indispensable need of any movement. I'm speaking of class collaboration or class interest subordination in this very profound sense of what has happened with these governments. So you can see this process, you can see a difference between this process in Cuba and the initial successes and subsequent setbacks of the Bolivarian government in Venezuela, which you have heard of the serious economic trouble that the country is in lately. And I don't have any doubt, there is no doubt in my mind that Chavez government had real legitimate concerns for the well-being or for giving a better life to wide swaths of the population. The problem is the shortcomings of the fact that they didn't do what the Cuban Revolution did, which was let the social movement itself take control of the economy, which is, and they had several big opportunities. For example, during December 2002, when there was a plot against Chavez and the pro-U.S. reactionaries sabotaged the oil wells, ducts, plants, and the largest tankers in PDVSA, in the PDVSA fleet. Oh, I'm sorry. We have some neighbors' dogs. Hopefully they'll pass quickly. Sorry for that. Okay. It's worthwhile to comment that this attempt to sabotage the Venezuelan industry is the largest known concerted attack that had used information technology sabotage, that is cyber technology sabotage, in order to defeat, or at the very least to put down on its knees, a government that is opposed to an imperialist power. It's also very interesting to note that this with Venezuela's own means supported by Brazil, they were able to defeat it. I mean, they oh, here they come. Let's see. Yeah, now they're going outside. I have a very noisy pet neighbor. Well. Okay, they were able to get the tankers again to sail again, and they defeated this cybernetic sabotage. And there was a lot of enthusiasm in the population, but they limited this movement, and the movement. Like the government acted, that it was more afraid of the popular mobilizations than of its own opponents. And what the Maduro government has been doing is to deepen this subordination and to make a more and more profound pact with what is called the Boliburguesia, the Bolivarian bourgeoisie in Venezuela. And so many of the advances have been set back. And the story is similar in Brazil, where the government of the Partido de los Trabajadores, or Workers' Party, allied with the bourgeoisie, has been upset by the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff. The alliance of the PT with the Brazilian bourgeoisie was really astounding. There's a curious piece in December 2011. There was a very curious piece published by a literary magazine from New York, the New Yorker. Many of you have obviously heard of it. In which the reporter at large who made this article narrates. The article is titled "The Anointed," and he gives us the following scene for you to see what just how deep this alliance had gone. The Planalto is the presidential residence in Brazil, largest open space, had been set up as a kind of auditorium with folding chairs and ties. I'm quoting from the article. The seats filled with reporters, members of the National Congress, and minor government ministers. After a few minutes, Rousseff strode down a white stone spiral ramp that served as a stairway between the announcement space and the floor above, followed by her highest-ranking ministers and dozens of Brazil's leading industrialists, all of whom do business with the government. The reporter sitting next to me, the press section, Angela Pimenta, nudged me and whispered, "We called that crowd the GDP." So with these alliances, you can see the consequences in Brazil. There's of course nothing wrong for any government to make limited or economic agreements with part of the bourgeoisie, but you can see just how deeply the Partido dos Trabajadores Brazil was involved in this, and you can see it also in the Lava Jato scandal, for which many of the leaders of the PT and other political parties are undergoing judicial process. This is all the more important because the lessons of these governments are all the more important because in the next elections, the nationalist left-leaning, I'm going to put this in between quotations, a nationalist candidate, López Obrador, has been creating very, very high expectations. Let me tell you that the movements of Mexico's workers and their allies, women, youth, campesinos, poor city dwellers that demand either their own plots or decent housing, as well as indigenous peoples and other allies, are currently at a very low point. All expectations are on the elections. The Mexican workers movement is sort of in a mood where they are waiting for a caudillo, for a big leader mounted on, well, he's not going to be mounted. López Obrador does not mount on a white horse, but you can imagine. I'm saying this figuratively and not materially. And people are awaiting this. There is a true avalanche of support for Andrés Manuel López Obrador. However, 3 minutes. Thank you. I'm about to. I'll finish with those 3 minutes. López Obrador has been putting the emphasis and has campaigned in order to give all the guarantees asked by the national capitalists as well as foreign capitalists of our ultra-privileged class in power. It is one of his fervent supporters, a very well-known writer, Paco Taibo, second, well, Paco Taibo first was his father, who was also a writer, made some radical statements, and he was put in sort of home arrest by his own López Obradorista party, who announced that he was traveling to Italy or to Brazil or something like that. And no, he was in his house, only that he was restrained in order not to talk to the press because he had made these radical statements. So we are living in a replay of electoral illusions, of a political campaign that is not relying on the movements, but is relying more and more on the fact that they want to make a pact with the bourgeoisie. And well, of course, let's see how the following 2 months. We still have a month and days before the elections play out, but the fact is that this is going to be very very negative for the movements in Mexico to express themselves, to connect themselves and to subordinate themselves to this political campaign. We have seen the descent in other Latin American countries. Thank you very much. This is a message I wanted to give.